Number 6, WrestleMania 6. Now, this one, again, much like WrestleMania 8, is making my top 10 because of my personal memories of this show. I loved this WrestleMania. This had a very big feel to it. It felt important. It was probably the biggest show that we had had as wrestling fans since WrestleMania 3, because 4 and 5 were in Atlantic City, and here they are in the Sky Dome for WrestleMania 6 in front of 68,000 people. This enormous audience, and it was great. I loved this pay-per-view. I basically have the thing memorized from beginning to end. When I was a kid, I probably rewatched this thing a ton of times, or when I was a teenager, I probably rewatched this thing a ton of times. And we had about 14 matches on the card. The whole entire show, the reason there was such a big crowd here was because WWE somehow managed to put together one of the most anticipated main events that you could have ever asked for. Hulk Hogan against the Ultimate Warrior. And this felt a lot like Hogan and Andre. Now, it wasn't quite as big, on quite as large of a scale, but damn close. And when you think about back in 87, you know, the fans were like, who can challenge Hogan? Who is in the company that could potentially, possibly beat him? The only guy anybody could think of that Hogan hasn't already ran through is undefeated Andre the Giant. 15 plus years they were billing him as, even though that was bullshit. So they did a great job of really building that match into an epic main event where you really didn't know what was going to happen. And you felt like Hogan's title run was in serious jeopardy. And here they're doing it again. Hogan is now in a babyface match. And you have to understand and appreciate how rare this was. This was 1990. You didn't see babyface matches like this. You'd get them sometimes, sporadically, but headlining the biggest show, to have these two guys wrestle, I can't even begin to explain to you how important it was for the time. And I'm not even a fan of the Ultimate Warrior or Hulk Hogan. Never really liked either guy. Thought they both sucked in the ring. But I'll tell you what, I got to give them both credit in this match. The match was good. You know, it wasn't Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, but it didn't have to be. You know, it was a match that was, you know, built mostly on crowd reaction, drama, psychology, shit like that. You know, the very long, drawn-out beginning with the test of strength and the repeating of moves. Warrior would do a body slam, then Hulk would. Back and forth in the beginning. The fans were hanging on everything. They literally felt like they were split 50-50. I remember even as a kid, 14 years old, screaming in my living room, literally for both guys. There was a point in the match where I was rooting for Hogan, and there was another point where I was rooting for Warrior. Even I didn't know what the hell I wanted. And, you know, when you look back to the reputation that these two guys have in the ring, I thought both of them did a great job. They really did. I didn't think the match was bad. I thought both guys sold for each other really well. I mean, Hogan, you got to remember, isn't used to taking punishment like this. Usually he's the victim of just a methodical beatdown, you know, from a heel. You know, he's not used to taking babyface offense where he's got to sell like a heel. And Hogan had to do that a couple of times when Warrior was working him over. And Warrior had to do the same thing for Hogan, and those two guys, neither of them were used to wrestling that way, but they made it work. And I thought it was an epic match and an epic finish with Hogan, you know, hulking up, going for the leg drop. We thought that was going to be it, and the Warrior moves. Last minute, moves out of the way, gets up, splashes Hogan, hits the 1-2-3 with Hogan kicking out maybe a half a second too early there, but he did take the 3 count, shocking the fans. I couldn't believe it. You know, Hogan's reaction after the match was priceless, and they had the great kind of show respect and hug at the end that was nearly botched. If you go back and watch that footage, Earl, I think, is the referee. Might have been Dave, pretty sure it's Earl though. He gets both the belts after the finish, and he's about to present both titles to the Ultimate Warrior, and you see Warrior grab the Intercontinental, but he pushes the world title back. He pushes the Winged Eagle title back into Earl, basically like, get this out of here, you dummy. Hogan is supposed to get this thing and bring it into the ring for me. So Warrior kind of saved the day there. Warrior knew what to do. The referee didn't. And finally, Hogan then, of course, exits the ring, grabs the belt, the Warrior's music shuts off. The crowd was dead silent. There was nearly 70,000 people in that building, and they were all quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. And Hogan gets right in the ring, hands the belt to the Ultimate Warrior, raises his hand, and the two share a very intense embrace. And I just remember really liking that. You know, I was kind of tearing up as a young wrestling fan watching that, you know, because I thought it was a really great moment. Even Jesse the Body Ventura appreciated the moment. Did you notice that? After the match and Hogan presents the belt to the Warrior, Jesse Ventura puts Hogan over. And Jesse Ventura has always been brutal on Hulk Hogan when he's doing commentary for his matches, and the two men did not get along. They had a ton of heat, but even Jesse showed respect to Hulk for passing the torch to the Warrior like that. So to me, it was just a really memorable WrestleMania main event. And you take two guys that, as a wrestling fan, for me, I wasn't a big fan of, and I'm this impressed by their match. I felt like that means something, and it occupies a huge part of my wrestling memory. For some of you older fans, maybe you watched this match as well. Maybe you ordered WrestleMania 6 on pay-per-view and watched this. So you know what I'm talking about. It was crazy, man. So I thought it was a really good match, and I thought Hogan and Warrior represented what it means to be in the main event of WrestleMania very well. So hats off to both guys. Great WrestleMania main event. This WrestleMania also sticks out to me because it's one of my favorite tag team title changes of all time. Demolition were challenging the Colossal Connection for the tag team titles. I believe this was the second match on the card. Demolition had recently regained the tag titles from the Brainbusters. Heenan got pissed off, took Andre, put him with Haku, forming what he felt was the unstoppable team to put them up against Demolition. They beat Demolition for the titles on a TV match, and they would have the rematch here at WrestleMania, and it was great. I loved it. Andre, by this point, was really starting to get old and really struggled in the ring. He didn't even work in this match. Haku worked the entire match. Andre never got tagged in, and eventually Axe and Smash were able to hit Haku with their finisher, regain the tag team titles in one of the best and most memorable pops that I've ever seen from an audience. When I try to think about and compare Demolition's pop to something else at WrestleMania, I think about the Warrior returning at WrestleMania 8, like I talked about earlier. The way the crowd was kind of jumping out of their seats like that, it felt the same when Demolition regained the tag team titles. And I loved the Demolition tag team. They were one of my favorites, probably top 3. I got to put Hearts and Bulldogs ahead of them. I've always been just such a huge, ridiculous fangirl for Stampede Wrestling and the Hearts and the Bulldogs. So I'm going to put them ahead of Demolition, but I'd definitely put Demolition number 3 on my favorite WWE tag teams of all time. And this, of course, also marked the end of Andre the Giant's run as a heel. He had been a heel for 3 years, basically exactly 3 years. And after the match, Bobby Heenan is pissed off, actually slaps Andre the Giant in the face, screaming at him for not getting in the ring. Andre then beats the shit out of Bobby Heenan, and then Haku tries to attack him, and he counters Haku's kick and then beats the shit out of Haku, and he rides away by himself in one of those carts down the aisleway to an enormous ovation from the audience. And we would not see much more of Andre the Giant. He wouldn't wrestle in the ring in WWE again, I don't believe. He had a couple of matches in Japan, and I think he got in the ring again a couple of times after this, but I don't believe he did in WWE. And just 3 years after this, he would pass away. I also really enjoyed a couple of singles matches on the show as well. Probably the best one was Ted DiBiase versus Jake the Snake Roberts. I mean, that was an awesome feud, and this match was for the $1 million belt. The belt was actually on the line, and DiBiase and Jake had a pretty intense feud that involved the Big Boss Man turning babyface and all of that. And this was probably one of the best Jake the Snake Roberts promos of all time. Of all time. Probably my favorite. I've got a couple of favorites, but this one I think will be my favorite of all time. And if you've never seen it, go back to WrestleMania 6, fire up the WWE Network, pull up Jake Roberts' pre-match interview with Mean Gene before he went out to the ring against Ted DiBiase, and you will get chills. I absolutely promise you, you will get chills. And the match was very good. DiBiase wound up winning, of course, and there was the memorable finish where Jake, I think he winds up hitting the DDT on DiBiase after the match and then passes all his money out. Mary Tyler Moore is in the front row. DiBiase, I think, would actually stay at ringside after this match and hide like under the ring or something, because he would attack the Big Boss Man who was up next against Akeem before his match and beat the crap out of him on the outside of the ring. So DiBiase wrapped up one feud with Jake and started a new one with the Big Boss Man. I also remember the Brutus Beefcake and Mr. Perfect match. Now, this was Perfect's kind of first loss. He was billed as being undefeated at this point. I think he had lost, but I think they were trying to pass him off as undefeated. Beefcake faces him one-on-one match, winds up slingshotting him into the ring post, and catches a quick win over Mr. Perfect because Mr. Perfect was knocked out cold. So that was the finish they did there. After the match, Brutus Beefcake cut the Genius's hair, and I was surprised that they ended Mr. Perfect's streak here, and against, of all people, Brutus the Barber Beefcake was the one to beat him. But a lot of people give Brutus shit. A lot of people poke fun at his career and the gimmick, but you gotta understand Beefcake was over. I know it's hard to believe, but he really was. Fans liked him. He had a kind of a cool look. I was even somewhat a fan of his theme song. I kind of liked it. Beefcake just had a lot of fans. He really did. And I thought WWE was going to put the Intercontinental title on him a couple of years before this. They probably would have had the Ultimate Warrior not gotten so over. You know, Beefcake came up short at WrestleMania 4 for the IC belt. He was probably in line to win it at SummerSlam, but he got bumped for the Warrior. So Beefcake was always over. He was a close friend of Hogan, of course, so he was going to be protected in that sense. But it was right after this that Beefcake would suffer that horrible parasailing accident where his entire face basically got caved in. And I would have really liked to see where his career went after this victory against Mr. Perfect. You know, how the rest of his year would have gone, who he would have worked with at the next WrestleMania, because Mr. Perfect, if you remember, would go on to win the Intercontinental title right after this because the Warrior had to forfeit it, and they had a tournament. So had Beefcake not got injured, they might have had Perfect win the Intercontinental title in the tournament, beating Beefcake along the way, and then doing another rematch, maybe at SummerSlam for the title, where Beefcake wins it. I'm not sure what the original plans were, but I wouldn't be surprised if they turned out to be that. This was one of the more jam-packed WrestleManias as far as matches go. We had Bad News Brown and Roddy Piper going to a double countout. We had Earthquake defeating Hercules. We had Jim Duggan defeating Dino Bravo. We had Boss Man defeating Akeem despite the beatdown from Ted DiBiase earlier on. And we had Rick Rude picking up a win over Jimmy Snuka. So a whole lot of filler matches there and only a couple of matches on the marquee. But a couple of more did stand out. The Hart Foundation, Brett and Jim, who had already challenged the winner of the Colossal Connection and Demolition match. They would go on to face them, of course, at SummerSlam. They beated the Bolsheviks in 19 seconds when Jim Neidhart just could not stand Nikolai singing that damn Russian national anthem, and he jumped him before he was finished, and the Harts kicked their asses, hit their finish, and pinned poor Boris in just a few seconds there. And this was also the mixed tag team match with Dusty and Sapphire taking on Sherry and Randy Savage. Miss Elizabeth made her return in this match, joining Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire and being in their corner, and that was a really memorable match as well. You know, I miss Sherry, I miss Elizabeth, every single participant in that match. Dusty, Sapphire, Elizabeth, Sherry, and Randy are all dead. Unreal. Orient Express also defeated the Rockers in a tag team match. I remember that. It got, I think it was a count out. Marty got some salt in the eyes. The Barbarian was recently acquired by Bobby Heenan when they split up the Powers of Pain. He beat Tito Santana in a one-on-one match. Rick Martel beat Coco Beware in the opener. So like I said, there was a whole lot of just random matches put together here. Nothing that memorable, but enough memorable. And the scale of this WrestleMania, and of course, this enormous main event was the selling point, and I thought it was a great WrestleMania, and still to this day, nearly 30 years later, I look back on it with great fondness.